So pleased now to be joined by Ryan McDonough, who has had quite a career around the NBA, former Suns GM, worked within the Celtics organization, now works for Odyssey on the radio side and does some analysis for NBA TV as well. Ryan, thanks for being with me.
Carolyn, great to see you again.
What's life like for you, on the radio broadcast side?
It's definitely different. For 15 plus years, I was in the Celtics front office for over a decade, and then the Suns for 5+ years as the GM. And I've really enjoyed seeing a different side of the business, a different perspective. I grew up in a media household. My father, Will, worked for NBC, CBS, the Boston Globe, and my oldest brother, Sean, broadcast for ABC and ESPN. So I was always curious about it, Carolyn. It was my major at University of North Carolina. So I'm enjoying broadcasting, but at the same time, a small part of me misses the competition on the team side as well.
Yeah, you have such a rich pedigree all throughout your family, and you do a phenomenal job yourself. There's so much I want to get to specifically within this Celtics-Nets matchup, because I just think that the storylines are fantastic. Kyrie and his interaction with the Celtics fans just continues to deliver time and time again. But more than that, what we're seeing offensively from the Nets is what I'm most curious about. I mean, through 2 games here, how does a team with so much offensive firepower struggle the way that they are against a team like Boston?
I think they're way too isolation heavy, Carolyn. The ball doesn't move. The players don't move. It seems to be take turns basketball with Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving going against a set Celtics defense. And keep in mind, the Celtics had the best defense in the league. In fact, once the calendar changed from 2021 to 2022, they were dominant defensively. So this is not the team, if you're Brooklyn, to try to isolate against and go one-on-one. As great as Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are, they need more ball movement. They need more player movement. There are reports today that Ben Simmons may be back for Game 4. But Carolyn, if they're down 0-3, I think it's going to be too late playing against a loaded and locked-in Boston team who, by the way, is playing without their best interior defender, Robert Williams. I've really been impressed with the Celtics defense, and the Nets need to try to facilitate some more ball movement and player movement as we approach Game 3.
Robert Williams was such a nice surprise, I felt like, at least for this team, the way that he's been able to deliver to the point where, like you said, it is devastating to lose him. But there was a game against the Knicks that was like a real turning point for the Celtics. And you have to give so much credit to their head coach and, everything that they're doing, their defensive prowess, the way that they hustle, the way that Tatum fights for every single thing. And then on the flip side of that, you've got this Nets team that Ben Simmons, to me, I mean, it's taken him so long, and I don't want to take anything away from the fact that, he's had this herniated disc in his back, but, he was supposed to be a key piece for this team when they let Harden get away. We haven't even seen him yet. Kyrie, for one reason or another, deciding, not to get vaccinated has really been such a roller coaster throughout the entire year. You have to give Kevin Durant credit for really just being almost a stabilizing force in what has seemed like a rotating door. I mean, how much credit does Steve Nash deserve, honestly, for even just getting them to this point? There is so much star power in this group, and yet they cannot figure out a way to find the consistency that they seemingly have desperately needed.
It's certainly been a soap opera in Brooklyn over the last 15 months. It's amazing that it was only a little over a year ago that James Harden demanded a trade from the Houston Rockets and wanted to go to Brooklyn. And then just a little over a year later, he didn't want to be in Brooklyn anymore. He wanted to be in Philadelphia. So I think that certainly set the franchise back. The Nets are in a tricky position here, Carolyn. Kevin Durant is on a long-term contract extension. He signed it last offseason, but Kyrie Irving is a free agent. They've really thinned out their depth. They don't have a lot of young players or draft picks going forward, given what they gave up to get James Harden in the first place from Houston. So Steve Nash has held it together. I know he's facing criticism now, and I think some of that is deserved for their lack of offensive creativity, but he was dealt a tough hand given all the player issues, and also given that they're playing the team that I think is playing as well as not only any team in the Eastern Conference, maybe any team in the NBA, in the Boston Celtics. I think the Celtics win this series, and they're my pick to win the Eastern Conference and play for a championship.
Oh, yeah. So what is it about them specifically that you think can take them all the way to a conference championship and potentially beyond?
I think the way they played without Robert Williams, that's the first part of my thesis, is that they've stayed very good on the defensive end. Without Williams, they continue to force turnovers and be disruptive. They have the Defensive Player of the Year, who may be the best perimeter defender in the NBA, and Marcus Smart. And also combined, Carolyn, with the information I'm getting out of Boston that Robert Williams' rehab is going very well. So I could see a scenario in which if the Celtics close out the Nets relatively quickly, say in 4, 5, maybe even 6 games. And then now in the other series with Milwaukee having an injury to Chris Middleton, that series may get extended against Chicago. I thought that would be a relatively quick series if the Bucks were healthy. So if that one goes long and the Celtics wrap up their series quickly, then Williams has more time to rehab and recover. Potentially, we could even see him next round in the Eastern Conference semifinals. So I think everything's lining up very nicely for the Boston Celtics. Certainly, the pressure is on Brooklyn as we shift back to Brooklyn for Game 3 in this series. I'd never bet against Kevin Durant, but with the uncertainty to Ben Simmons, the lack of depth for the Nets, and how good the Celtics are looking, I'm really bullish on Boston.
You add to the fact that it doesn't seem like, for whatever reason, just living in New York here, that the Nets have some kind of tangible home court advantage like the Celtics do. I mean, it's a hodgepodge of different kind of fans, some who want to go because they want the experience of going to a game, but it doesn't have that sort of pressure cooker feel that you would want or need, especially if you have your backs against the wall for a team like Brooklyn. And, you mentioned just things kind of breaking for you the right way in the postseason in terms of the length of other series and potential matchups. As a GM and your experience there, how much does it matter to have all those things break the right way, to have these to have things come together in a really efficient manner where you can get even just a couple extra days rest to get a player back, like you said, with Robert Williams, or just to prepare for the next series?
Yeah, it's critically important, Carolyn. To win at the highest levels of NBA basketball, you have to be really good, but you also have to be really lucky. And the breaks have to go your way. I think we saw that a year ago with the Phoenix Suns and Milwaukee Bucks. They were the two healthiest teams. It looks like Giannis had suffered a devastating injury in the Eastern Conference Finals against Atlanta. He miraculously bounced back and then went on to dominate the finals, winning the championship along with the finals MVP. So you have to be lucky and good. And I think we've seen, even though we're less than a week into the playoffs at this point, how much injuries do impact the playoffs. Word out of Phoenix this morning that Devin Booker may be out for 2 or 3 weeks. Luka Doncic, there's some uncertainty about when he returns. Hopefully that's sooner rather than later if you're a Mavs fan. So again, you have to be really lucky. You have to be good. And, sometimes it just doesn't work out your way. Carolyn, when I was in the Celtics front office, I think our best team was the 2009 team, the year after we won the championship. As you remember, you're covering the franchise at the time. Kevin Garnett hurt his knee. We lost in the conference semifinals to the Orlando Magic, and the rest was history. So sometimes you get the breaks, sometimes you don't. But your job as an executive coach or player is to put your team in position where if everything does go right, you have a chance to win at the highest levels.
Who do you think really kind of deserves a pat on the back for the way that the Celtics have resurrected, I don't know if that's the right word, their season, but they seem to pick up speed in the second half of their season where everything just started to click and they were playing really well at just the right time. I mean, is that coaching? Is that the players finding another gear? Is that something that Brad Stevens has been able to do behind the scenes that, somebody on the outside might not see?
I think it's a combination of all those people combining to lift the team. But I think if I were to look at one guy, start with Ime Udoka and what he's done, because the turnaround was very unusual, Carolyn, in that it wasn't triggered by a player coming back from injury. Yes, they had some guys in and out of the lineup. It was not triggered by a giant trade that really shifted the team. It was more just internal improvement and self-correction, really right around the New Year. I think they were 16-19 on New Year's Eve. They beat the Phoenix Suns, who were the best team in the regular season. And then their season really turned right around New Year's, and they've been dominant since then, especially defensively. So I start with Ime Udoka. Obviously, the players deserve a ton of credit. There were questions externally about Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Would those guys play well enough together? Also about Marcus Smart. Is he a traditional point guard? Can he facilitate? I think all those questions have been answered. And, I'll stick with my pick from before the playoffs started, Carolyn. The two teams over my shoulder here, the Boston Celtics and Phoenix Suns, meeting for the NBA title.
So with that said, you mentioned Devin Booker's hamstring injury that might sideline him reportedly for a couple of weeks here. I mean, how concerning is this for Phoenix?
It's concerning for a few reasons. They lost game 2 in Phoenix. Brandon Ingram had a terrific game for the Pelicans the other night. They play game 3 and 4 in short succession on Friday and Sunday down in New Orleans. So Booker's definitely out for both of those games. And one stat that really impressed me, Carolyn, that I didn't realize till I saw it the other day is that since the trade deadline, since the New Orleans Pelicans made the big deal with the Portland Trail Blazers to bring in not only C.J. McCollum, but Larry Nance Jr. as well, who's played very well for them, they're in the top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency. So as an executive, I look at that and say, usually to compete for a championship, you have to be in the top 10 in both. You have to be good offensively and defensively. Certainly, I don't think this Pelicans team is a championship contender, especially without Zion Williamson, but they are a much better team than their record would indicate. So Phoenix without Devin Booker has their work cut out for them. And the best team, I think, that I've seen so far in the playoffs is lurking. They wouldn't play until the Western Conference Finals, but for me, Carolyn, through the first few days of the NBA playoffs, the Golden State Warriors have looked tremendous, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. I think it will be Phoenix and Golden State for the Western Conference title, but as you mentioned, a lot of to be determined rests on the future of Devin Booker and that hamstring.
If those teams do match up, you're still giving the edge to Phoenix if they've got Booker healthy and available?
I would, but it's very close. It's a coin flip for me. They matched up early in the year. I think a lot of people have forgotten how good Golden State was early, Carolyn. I think they were 31-10, something like that, through the first half of the season. And then the injuries set in to Steph Curry, to Draymond Green. Klay Thompson was shaking off the rust after having missed multiple years. So the Golden State team now has really started to meld together very well. And I think one of the underrated factors is the emergence of Jordan Poole, who played a bigger role when those guys were out. So in a lot of ways, Carolyn, his job now gets easier with Steph and Klay and Draymond healthy back in the lineup. He doesn't face as much defensive attention. So I slightly lean toward Phoenix. I think if Phoenix is in that position, Booker's hamstring will be fully recovered by then. But certainly that's not a given. And of the 16 teams in the playoffs that I've watched now play all multiple games so far, Golden State has been the most impressive.
You know, it's interesting to think about the playoffs through the lens of a GM or through the mind of a GM. And you mentioned offensive and defensive efficiency and some of the things that you kind of look for when you start to look at potential matchups down the line or what's in front of, you for a team as managing a team as a general manager. Can you help me kind of understand or walk me through that process of what a GM is kind of looking for or how they're evaluating what the next playoff series could potentially hold for their organization? I mean, are you really breaking down the stats? Are you looking at specific matchups? Is it bigger than that? It's a fascinating way to kind of view each round.
I'll be honest with you, Carolyn. Being an executive in the NBA playoffs is a pretty hopeless feeling because you've done all you can do at that point. All you can really do is support the coaches, support the players. And I bring that up because the trade deadline is passed. That was in February. The deadline to add players to the roster is the last day of the regular season. Now that's out the window. So your playoff roster is set. So really it's difficult. And it's funny. I've talked to guys who have played, coached, been executives, guys like Danny Ainge who have kind of done all of it. They said the most hopeless feeling is as an executive because you can't do anything about it. You're sitting there, as a fan, obviously a heavily invested fan, watching the team play. So really, I think your role is just to support the coaches, support the players, maybe give them some tips. However, you don't want to go overboard with it. I've seen executives and owners in particular go to the coach, what about this? What about that? Because everybody wants to win. It's a passionate, involved thing with the stakes being very high. So, but yeah, it's a weird feeling. I watched the games myself, but I know some of my colleagues or guys on other teams, couldn't stand to watch. They'd go outside and walk around or watch it on their phone or from the video room just because of the stress and pressure combined with the ability not to do anything about what's going on the floor.
Yeah, I'm sure a head coach doesn't want a side seat driver, at least at that point in the playoffs when you've got everything riding on the line. I almost feel like it's like you guys would be packing up your kids and sending them to college or something like that. It's the sentiment that I'm getting, that your hands are completely tied. It's interesting to think about it that way. You mentioned a hopeless feeling. How should Lakers fans feel about everything that has transpired this season?
I liked your transition there, and I think it was very appropriate. Not very good, to be honest with you, because as an executive for a decade and a half in the NBA, I don't see an easy solution. So looking backward, it didn't go well. Obviously, the roster was too old. The pieces did not fit together well at all. The ball didn't move, especially defensively. I thought the loss of Alex Caruso in particular to the Chicago Bulls hurt the team in terms of their lack of perimeter defense. And then just the effort, the little things, Carolyn, that winning teams do when you watch Boston or Phoenix or Golden State, guys are diving on the floor for loose balls. They're setting good screens. They're blocking out. I didn't see that from the LA Lakers. So that's looking backward. Looking forward, it's difficult because it's a very top-heavy roster in terms of not only the talent, but the contracts as well. Russell Westbrook's going to make $47 million next year. Teams view him, the other 29 teams view him as a fraction of that salary. They don't view him nearly as a $47 million player, which means that the Lakers are kind of stuck. I mean, maybe they could try to trade him for less bad contracts, Carolyn, they're not going to get good contracts for Westbrook, but and then try to break those contracts off. But that's not what you want to be doing as an executive, especially with the great LeBron James, who's remarkably still in his prime. I think it has to end at some point, and then Anthony Davis being relatively injury prone. So I don't see an easy solution. They don't have a lot of young talent. They don't have a lot of draft picks, especially given the deal they did to get AD from New Orleans, and they don't have a lot of financial flexibility. So Rob Pelinka, Kurt Rambis and company have a difficult job in the Lakers front office, and certainly there's a lot of pressure on them this offseason, given how last year went.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just, on the flip side of that, going back to the Eastern Conference for just a moment, you look at the ratings, the opening ratings for the NBA playoffs, they were really high. I think they were higher than they've been in over a decade. And I think about who's most likable in today's NBA. You have a guy like LeBron, who's a superstar, of course, but my mind, I think about Luka Doncic, all these other guys, but my mind really goes to Giannis Antetokounmpo as really the league's face, the league's star. Is that an accurate assessment? And if so, how important is a guy like Giannis to the league when you look at it from a 30,000 foot view and bringing new fans in and having him kind of never put a foot out of place?
He's been a great ambassador for the game. And as a former executive, if I were picking one player today or a week ago to start the playoffs in terms of who you'd want on my team, Giannis would be the number one pick because of his offensive and defensive impact. And also what we saw him do a year ago, dominating the playoffs en route to Milwaukee's first championship in 50 years and the finals MVP. So he's certainly the best player. I'll give you one more, Carolyn. If you really dig into the ratings, Steph Curry, I think, is the most popular player in the league. And what he does, I think, because of who he is as a person, because of the way he plays, I think his size does have a lot to do with it, that he's maybe more relatable than some of these, giant extreme athletes that people can't say, oh, okay, I couldn't do that. But a lot of young players growing up think they can, even though they can't, but they think they can shoot like Steph or want to shoot like Steph. So they try to replicate his game. So if you look at the Warriors ratings, they're fantastic. And I think that would be a heck of a finals. It's certainly a possibility if Steph and the Warriors played Giannis and the Bucks for the NBA championship.
I won't keep you too much longer, Ryan. I really appreciate the time. But if the Nets are going to figure out a way, and I say that, thinking that it's nearly impossible to get back into this with the way that Boston is playing, what are they going to absolutely have to do on Saturday against this team?
Well, they have to move the ball more, first and foremost. They're going to have to rebound also, because one of the challenges for them is when they're a little bit bigger, when they have Andre Drummond, he's an excellent rebounder, maybe the best in the league, but he does not bring that rim protecting presence. He's also not a floor spacing presence. So everything with Drummond's really on both ends, Carolyn's right around the basket. If they bring in Nick Claxton, they get more versatile. I think their team is more active, but they're also very light. And the Celtics are a strong physical team. You look at the Celtics' best players, Al Horford, Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. Those guys are strong physical dudes who can beat you up, especially on the offensive boards if you don't box out. So defensively, they need to rebound better. Offensively, they need to move the ball. I think Kevin Durant will snap out of it, although I thought that the other night before game 2. He's a historically great player. Usually guys like that don't have 3 bad games in a row. So I'm not going to bet against KD. I still think the Celtics win this series, but I'm expecting a big bounce back game from Kevin Durant in game 3.
Ryan, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Carolyn, always great to be on with you.